Hey everyone, this is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to take a look at the astrology of August. It is a really big month, lots of transits going on, and maybe one of the biggest transits of the month is the entrance of Mars into Gemini, which we will not be focusing on a ton today, but is really important because Mars is going to spend a whole load of time there, and later in October will turn retrograde. So we're going to actually late this month of August, we're going to start to see what Mars in Gemini is all about. And there's lots more as well. A lot of aspects this month to go through. So that is what we are going to do today. And I'm really excited to have my friend and colleague and former alumni of one of my programs, Alex Amorosi, here to help me break down the weather. One of the things I'm going to be doing going forward is trying to occasionally invite a guest who is practicing astrology, having come out of my programs, onto the show in order to break down the astrology of the month ahead. I think it's fun to talk about the astrology of the month ahead in conversation. I find that my wheels start turning and I think of things that I couldn't have thought of otherwise when I'm bouncing things off from another smart astrologer. So, and it's a way of hopefully building up some of my alumni who are out there, grinding and building their practice. And so yeah, anyway, Alex will be joining us in just a second. But before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, share your comments in the comment section, click on the notification bell for updates. If you want to be notified when I have a new talk or I'm going live, you can always find transcripts of my daily talks on my website, nightlightastrology.com, where you can also learn more about my readings and courses. If you have any questions about anything as you're looking over those things on my website, feel free to email info@nightlightastrology.com. Well, with that being said, I'm going to welcome Alex onto the show. Alex, thanks for being here again.
Oh, I'm so excited to be back.
Yeah. By popular demand, I got so many good emails after the episode we did on the Becoming a Professional Astrologer series. People were like, please have Alex back sometime. And I was like, you know what? I've been thinking of doing this for a while, of having someone let's look at the transits together for the month. And so by popular demand, you're back, man.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. More Star Wars. No, just kidding.
Yeah, no. Okay, screw it. Let's just talk Empire Strikes Back. If you guys want to learn more about Alex today, although we're going to be talking about the transits for August, you can learn more about Alex at alexamorosiyoga.com. But if you want to follow his astrological posting and content, you really want to check out Alex Amorosi Healing on Instagram, where you can see him doing a lot of reels and live streams and things like that. And you can also contact him there if you want to book a reading. So should we get into it?
Yeah, let's do it. There's lots to talk about.
Yeah, there is. August is a big month. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can get the highlighter out. You know, it's serious business when the highlighter's coming out. Exactly. I don't know how many people have been like, could you tell me the program that you're using? And I'm like, it's honestly, you can download it for free. It's called Epic Pen. And it's a free program. It just pops up and it gives you like a circle, a line, a square, and an arrow. You can just draw with it. It's handy though.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so the month starts off with arguably one of the most dynamic and potentially volatile transits of 2022. Honest to God, this was top 5 in terms of the ones that have me going like, ooh, when I did my 2022 overview. It is Mars conjoining Uranus in Taurus. Now, I'm going to start off by saying a few things, and I'm going to invite Alex to say things, and then we're going to bounce around back and forth as we go through the rest of the transits. We did a video about this already. I've already made content on this topic. But the reason that it's worth mentioning again is because, first of all, synodic conjunctions, when two planets come together in a conjunction, it means the start of a new cycle between the energies or archetypes of those two planets. You think of Mars, you think of strength, will, assertiveness, and courage on maybe the bright side. On the downside, you think of anger, violence, explosiveness, conflict, cutting, accidents, things like that, frustration. I have a little bit of a sunburn on my face today. I got that yesterday as I fell asleep in the sun, and the moon and Mars were conjoining in my first house. So there you go. Um, but Mars and Uranus, when you put Mars together with Uranus, the god of revolution, the god that loves to shake things up, that will not be held back by tradition or habits that are worn out, patterns that are established but maybe boring. So Uranus is always, whether it's breaking the speed of sound or setting a Guinness book, a world record of some kind, or if it's like flipping your teacher off in Catholic school, and being told you're going to hell or something, that's Uranus. So Mars and Uranus, you put them together, and the reason this is such a big deal to tone the month of August is because you're talking about the seeding of a very volatile but potentially very revolutionary moment. You could see people starting a new chapter of life because of something that happens that is not planned for, is very surprising, and maybe not entirely easy. And it starts a whole new cycle. On the other hand, you could see someone experiencing a major breakthrough, getting the courage to do something, pushing something forward. So there's a lot of different ways of thinking about it, but it is toning the month ahead. It is a little volatile, erratic, unpredictable. It's not the kind of time to get into it with someone on the highway who has cut you off. It's volatile. Those are just my initial few thoughts. What do you think about this one, Alex? What kind of notes do you have on this?
I was thinking, this is dynamic is like one of the words you can easily use for this transit, but I was also the North Node is involved too of the moon, and that always tends to me to be a volume up button on any sort of aspect or transit. And so I think that all of those things, I think that this is an aspect that on its positive aspect, if you feel sort of stuck or entrenched in a routine, particularly with the fixed earth of Taurus, like this can be a really good aspect for, Uranus gives you a different perspective suddenly. Like, oh, I never thought of that before. Why don't I try this? And Mars sort of gives you the energy to do it. I think that you have to be mindful in this aspect too, on a personal level, of not trying to just be free for the sake of being free. And I think that Rahu, the North Node, with Uranus in this transit, in the Vedic understanding of it, would have this sort of like craving quality to it. Like, I must be free, or I must be free, or it must be new. And I think differentiating between like, is this something I really need to do differently or establish some sense of freedom around, or am I just feeling that way?
Mm-hmm.
I think because this is one of those transits that I think all of us, there are some transits are coming and you're like, okay, I kind of know the energy's going on. I can kind of breathe my way through this or that. But I think this is one that is so sudden and can feel so erratic that it kind of grabs all of us in some way.
Yeah. I sometimes think of this as there's a fine line between a breakthrough and the burning of a bridge.
Yeah.
You can easily sabotage yourself or a relationship, or in differentiating or individuating. Yeah. There's a fine line between bulldozing someone else or like rejecting something so hard in the name of independence or personal growth or evolution that you end up looking like a jerk, or you end up hurting someone else. And then on the other hand, not everyone's going to be happy when you do something with Mars and Uranus conjoining. Like there's going to be a sense of like putting your flag in the ground or something.
Yeah. And I think like it's that the will that Mars brings to this, to be like, sometimes I think Uranus is the will Mars brings to this is like, yeah, this is the will to do this thing, like a what the hell type thing. Or if I can't, in a positive sense, and when you have it's the right thing to do, be like, you know what, I never thought I could move to Alaska and, weave baskets or whatever, something like that, all respect for everybody who does that. I mean, I've thought of it several times myself, but like, I'm a card carrying introvert here, but, like it could be that, or is it like I'm really frustrated with something going on right now that I need to address, that I might feel I need to be trying to get away from, or is there something going on that I need to like kind of stick with and maybe find a different way of looking at it? So I think that I just feel like that North Node present with this is a very, very powerful aspect to it.
Yeah, it's funny if you think about the Vedic point of view. Rahu is sort of like stirring. It's like a hungry ghost. And it's whatever you try to feed it might temporarily satiate it, but ultimately it's not ever satiated. So if you think of someone with Mars and the North Node together natally, you think of Lance Armstrong.
Yeah.
here's someone who wanted to win, but at what cost? He took steroids, doping scandal, eventually is stripped, loses all of his money. So, beware of the voice that says, you deserve this. You ought to just. And the funny thing is that, not that I think that modern evolutionary astrology is just across the board invalid. I don't. I think it's a totally valid practice. But the North Node in the evolutionary point of view is thought of as something you ought to go out and do in order to grow and learn and so forth. How different of an opinion the Vedic view is. It's like the Vedic view would tell you that same impulse, that you should be very careful about it, because it's actually sort of the impulse of, an ambition that's sort of like on steroids, So
Yeah.
So there is some, there's just being very careful about what constitutes growth, at what cost, what is healthy ambition, what isn't. I think those things are going to be, certainly we are going to see examples of this in the news for sure. For sure.
Oh, yeah.
Like this kind of a transit, you can't miss it in the news.
No, and I mean, and Uranus is already conjunct the North Node, and will be by the time people are watching this. And so Mars is just going to be getting into the mix by August 1st. So I think we're starting to get a little bit of a preview of this into the news, and this will come up during the month too as we get into it more. Yeah.
If people want to go deeper into Mars Uranus, I highly recommend going back and listening to the video I did earlier this week on it, because you will, you'll get a double dose of this topic if it's one that's like really clicking for you. We're going to keep moving because we have lots of transits to talk about. And actually, I forgot as we were going. So that's August 1st, Mars conjoining Uranus. Well, the very next day, there's a little bit of a buffer built in, because the next day we're going to see Venus making a sextile with Uranus. Very hard. Look at the huge arrow appeared. I don't know why, just occasionally this massive arrow will pick, and I'm like, I can't tell what I'm doing to make that happen. All right, so there's Venus making a sextile with Uranus. There's some reception if you want to look at reception with the outer planets, up to you, but Uranus is in Venus's sign. Venus has a sextile with Uranus, is moving into a sextile with Mars at the exact same time. So this would seem to me to, at the very least, add a kind of diplomatic Venusian presence. It's as though I'm trying to take, this is just my example, please, but I'm trying to do something that I really need to do. But thank God my wife, who's a Cancer rising, is in the room being like, honey, just CTFO, because, you're acting a little crazy. I feel like the goddess just brings that concern for, is this enjoyable though? Is this beautiful? Is it really, does it feel good? And are we getting along? Or, there's a concern with harmony or for harmony. To me, this feels like a moment that could be really maybe even veering toward destructive. But because Venus is there, I'm feeling a little bit more positive about it. What do you think, Alex?
I think it's exactly. And I like the chain here we have. So we have the moon actually in Libra hosting Venus, Venus in Cancer hosting this whole lineup in Taurus. So I love that for the quality it brings of what the phrase that was coming to mind as you were saying that was Uranus, I think oftentimes is a sort of rebellious, I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to tell them. With Mars there too, that could be a very strong impulse in some way to express something. And Venus being but is it kind? Is it nurturing? Is it caring? Especially Venus in Cancer, right? Is this going to nurture the situation? Is this going to be a kind thing? Is it going to be effective? But I think that there's a lot of cooling that happens from that, especially because Venus is hosting the moon. Moon's a nice diplomatic Libra. Yep. And they're just, nice and balanced. This could really offset a balance, and maybe that needs to happen, but it gives you the evaluation skill from a cooler place.
Yeah, there's if you look at it too, I'm just considering even the moon phase. It's in this early, waxing crescent, sort of between waxing crescent and first quarter, and it's harmonizing with the sun in a sextile. because
Mhm.
you've got harmony between the lights on that day. So it feels like even if August 1st or the very end of July is a little bit intense, by the second you have a real cooling energy coming through, I think.
Yeah.
So, or if we've gone too far in some ways, we might get a little correction or pacifying energy from Venus.
Mhm.
Let's go to August 4th. On August 4th, Mercury is going to enter the sign of Virgo. Now, planetary ingresses on their own are not necessarily the world's biggest deal. They make a splash when they enter a new whole sign house in your birth chart, which I think alone could be worth looking at. But it's really the dignity. Mercury's entering its own domicile and its own exaltation, which means that you have, and it's just having appeared as an evening star. Like now it's a very diplomatic Mercury because it's in that feminine evening star position. It really knows how to communicate socially. It's in an earth sign, so it's also starting to harmonize. It's providing testimony toward the Mars Uranus separation, which I think again feels to me like, okay, there's some real diplomatic energy coming in as soon as the Mars Uranus dynamic is over. But Mercury having such good dignity alone just points to, especially if you look at the whole sign house of Virgo in your birth chart and just think, I've got some weeks here where things in that house just might be a little bit easier and more effective. That will be looking different for everyone based on the birth chart, but it's nice to have a nice evening star, very well dignified Mercury around. Cooler heads can prevail when Mercury's there to sort of think through things and offer its help and its constructive concern over everything. Those are some thoughts that come to my mind. What about you, Alex?
Yeah, I think that impeccable is a word I often use for Virgo. That it gives you like this impeccable sense and this analytical sense to take things that might have it seemed irrationally volatile at first in the month. Mercury in Virgo gives you the ability to look at something from a highly analytical, highly precise, organized lens. To sort of take things and be like, wait a second, let me just put these things in order in a way that will provide me a sense of growing stability for anything that I might be doing. I think with Virgo, just having a lot of Virgo in my chart, one thing even the well-dignified Mercury is watching out for getting obsessive or worried or for the sake of obsession or worry. But I think with Mercury's dignity, it's its exaltation, it's its rulership, it's a newly reborn Mercury. So, just been reborn in the heart of the sun, coming out of evening star. So I think it's a great signature. I love Mercury's transits through Virgo. They're
Yeah.
just they're so calming in the sense of like, this is giving me time to get everything in order. This is giving me time to like step back, take a break, organize, and then feel like I have a good platform of stability going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great point. One of the things that I've been looking at is if we consider what's happening around August 20th, which we'll get to later, but Mars is entering Gemini, which is Mercury's sign. Mercury is at the moment in now in a constructive whole sign trine. Trines are of the nature of Jupiter, so it's starting to communicate through a whole sign trine to Mars. And by later in the month, then it has reception with Mars. It's as though Mercury and Mars, let's call it the analytical function and the executive function, that those two are getting onto the same page about something. And then when Mars enters Gemini, it's as if, boom, then something's being implemented. So I almost think about this as a time of like strategically analyzing, breaking things apart, starting to think about things that are going to be implemented later in the month when Mars then pops into Mercury's sign, and Mercury is exalted in its own sign, and they're in a square together, a Mars type of dynamic, which to me would suggest action, that the two are like planning and then acting.
Yeah, for sure. And that there's the ability to, I think what is really good about Mars and Mercury together is not they're both separating principles. They're both principles of being able to separate out, okay, organize over here, the Mercury principle, but Mars sort of just being able to cut through things or pierce through things and to look, we still got a nice watery Venus in Cancer. There's Neptune is retrograde in Pisces. It kind of cuts through some of the, if there were any fog or there was still any residuals from this sort of just like what might feel like an upheaval, it's like, okay, I can cut through that a little bit to see clearer.
Yeah.
In a way. And I'm really excited for Mars's entrance into Gemini. Long ingress, but I mean, stay there. But,
yeah. I think that's going to be super interesting, especially when you look. I mean, when we get closer to the retrograde, I'll be talking about some of the historical events under previous Mars retrogrades in Gemini. They're fascinating.
Yeah.
A lot of big technological developments seem to happen. Anyway, we'll get to that in a second. All right. So August 7th. This to me, if I'm building a story, I have some thoughts. I also have some thoughts about this transit on its own. But August 7th, Venus will trine Neptune. Oh, there it is again. It did it again. All right, let's see if I can.
It's like a very RuPaul arrow, the hot pink.
Yeah, I don't know if I can change the color or not. I think maybe I can. I like it. I'm going to keep it that way.
It's great.
So, okay, so Venus trines Neptune. What you start us off with this one. What do you think about Venus in Cancer trining Neptune in Pisces?
I wrote the holy compassion of care and love, transcendence and nostalgia through beauty. I tend to find in the water signs, but particularly Cancer and Pisces, there's a sense of nostalgia that often comes up, or thinking of things that were beautiful and aesthetically pleasing that come from a sense of like, wasn't that wonderful or wasn't that beautiful? I think it's one of those aspects. I love Venus and Neptune together. It's one of those aspects that just brings a lot of grace and a lot of softness and the loveliness of the water energy between two very exquisitely sensitive and like sort of caring, compassionate signs. One thing I notice sometimes with Venus and Neptune, I've noticed in practice, is being mindful of sometimes romancing disappointment or romancing like hope, eternal hope, so to speak. And sometimes I've seen this happen too, like what I call the Exodex comes out, like, going back, like, wasn't that a beautiful relationship, or wasn't that great? Shouldn't I call them? Shouldn't I text them? Like, you're just kind of scrolling through. So like, that may or may not be, something that comes up or is a good idea. But those are things that I think of with Venus and Neptune, but really like this idea of just sort of expanding into that Neptunian sense of more transcendent or universal sense of love out of the Venus's sort of sense of, I think Venus can feel very personal in a way, like where I love my friends, or I love my animals, or I love my relationship, or I love that. But where Neptune sort of expands you out to that more sense of like open oneness and love, that sort of idea.
Right. I love everyone.
I love you, buddy.
So Venus is also going to go 2 days later on August 9th. Venus goes right ahead and opposes Pluto. To me, if I feel like I have to look at these together as well. And I'm sure you're going to have some things to add to Venus Pluto, considering its tight sequence, Venus Neptune, Venus Pluto. To me, there's a feeling of something happening around love, relationships, family, right? And a sense of one's horizons or heart being expanded, one's perspective being opened somehow, more vulnerable. It's something that's very personal, but suddenly it could become very transpersonal. It could become an experience that changes your life or your perception somehow. But then immediately it's like, as a result, there's purgation, or there's release or catharsis, or you have to face something almost immediately as a result or closely linked to it. Let me think of a good example. Like, let's say, for example, that you're in a relationship with someone and you have a very heart changing experience. Your heart or mind are changed somehow because of a personal experience that you have. You realize right away as a result of it that there's some stuff in your personal relationship that hey, look, my partner's not necessarily going to understand this or see eye to eye. I saw this all the time as a yoga studio owner. You've probably seen it too. People take a yoga teacher training, suddenly their heart's opened, but that brings up some butting of heads in their marriage or their partnership. So I could see whatever Venus and Neptune are opening as immediately creating like a test or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. It is funny you say that, because every teacher training I've ever taught, the second or third weekend, someone will ask the question, like, I'm really into this and I'm growing in so and so in my life, my partner, my husband, my whoever. And there's that tension immediately, because there's just starting to shift in the way one sees the world. And I think Pluto often brings a feeling too of everything feeling kind of existential. Like there's an intensity around, like, this is the only thing or the only way, or they're and becoming that sort of obsessiveness that can come from feeling like, if I don't have this, I won't exist type of feeling. And
Yeah.
there's a real intensity that comes from it. And if you can sit with it and notice it, it can bring up something that has needed to leave for a long time.
Yeah.
That's a real blessing of a Pluto transit. But I think one of the things I've noticed with Pluto, definitely with myself, I have a lot of Pluto transits and definitely with clients, is there can be with Pluto Venus like this sense of like existential love. Like this is so intense, or it's so this, or it has to be this person or this thing. And whatever is generating that feeling is usually what needs to be seen. What is generating the feeling is what needs to be seen and brought to the surface. That's Pluto's big blessing. It'll bring that stuff.
Yeah. That's a great point. I love the way you put that. I also think about Venus trining Neptune as, let's just say, make an analogy, and let's say that you go to a water park. Oh my God, this is paradise. It's summer. It's the water park. You know, it's like a kid's dream to go and go to the, go to Six Flags or something like that. And but when you drop off the water slide into the pool, there's a big turd floating in it, like, and so there's also like what we desire, what we want, what we wish for, our fantasy, and then something that we might have to like, is that healthy? Is that good for me? Venus Neptune can be the delusion of going to the shopping mall and spending a ton of money on a dress you really like, or a pair of shades that you think are going to, make or break you, only to realize that you've gone over your budget, and now you don't have, money to go out to dinner with your significant other or something like that, and all of a sudden you're screwed. I'm not trying to make it too dark, but just the dreaminess of Venus Neptune, followed by what could also be like there's a shadow to that with Pluto, something like that.
Yeah, totally. Like I've gone to the water park and I have to be in that water slide. That's the one. And it has to be only that one. It's just like, girl, do you really need to be in that one? I don't know. Water slide, like I totally agree. I totally agree with that too. Like the Venus Neptune is almost, to me, sometimes hyper romantic, right? There can be that sense of that ultra romance, ultra beauty, and Pluto can intensify that to think like, I don't want to get too dark, but there can be sort of a Gollum feeling with Venus Pluto, like, this is my precious, this is my ring sort of feeling.
Yes,
so we're staying out of Star Wars.
Star Wars, but Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
Anyway, so I actually, that's what I have to say about that. I think it's an interesting transit, an interesting lineup of the transit.
Yep. Yeah. Well, the 11th is packed. Let's go forward to the 11th. Now, on the 11th, there's a bunch of things happening. One is that Venus will enter Leo. I have to mention it because that's my natal Venus placement. So, start of a Venus return for me. Woohoo! But let's see here. The sun, more importantly, the sun will be square to Uranus at the same time that there is a full moon in Aquarius, and at the same time that Mars is sextiling Neptune. So that's a lot. Let's put it all in. You can see Mars sextiling Neptune. You can see the sun finishing its square right here to Uranus, and the moon is starting to oppose the sun, which is the full moon. So that's a lot, especially given that the sun is just pulling into an opposition with Saturn, which is going to perfect by the 14th. So the full moon is basically conjoined with Saturn. It is a very powerful time. Like middle of the month in August is potent. Given where everything's been in the month, it for me, it becomes increasingly difficult to see the big picture. Like, what is that? What does this mean? The more aspects there are, the harder it is for my system to like compute. So I'll just say a few general things. The first thing I would say is that this is a time where the revolutionary impulse of Mars-Uranus that started the cycle off, and the exploration of desires and dreams, maybe with Venus and so forth, is going through some kind of gauntlet. Sun and Uranus is very much like Mars and Uranus, except for it's a little bit more tempered. It's like the revolution that a wise, stable leader is leading, as opposed to, Maverick and Top Gun with Mars Uranus, who's taking off on his own. So you have the feeling of like, let me implement with this kind of solar stability, this revolutionary change with Uranus that's just been seeded at the beginning of the month with Mars Uranus. But you're getting major kickback from the full moon with Saturn being like, no, you can't, you shan't, you shouldn't, or have you considered this, or are you really seeing the big picture? Or, so it's a revolutionary moment, but it's really being checked and challenged by Saturn, which is also foreshadowing the Uranus-Saturn square that's coming back in the fall. Yeah. So that's the best I can do with this series. One thing I like, Mars sextile Neptune at the same time, that energy strikes me as Mars-Neptune in a sextile is very sacrificial. How can my will be aligned with something bigger than myself? We were talking about Venus-Neptune as a compassion or a love that's larger than just the personal and the familiar. Might take us to the universal. When the will is paired with Neptune, it gets a little bit more universal as well in Mars. And it's very harmonious sextile. So I think a really redeeming factor about the intensity of this full moon time around August 11th is that the will of Mars and Neptune are able to somehow see the bigger picture. And maybe there's something about that helps us through the tension between Sun Uranus and Sun Saturn.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that it's actually strikes me as somewhat similar to the Venus aspect to those planets at the beginning of the month, where it just like Neptune and Pisces brings a little water to the situation, something that could feel like you are really like you are grinding up against a wall, or the drill hits bedrock or something like that. There's some way of softening through it, probably by, as you were saying, acyuta, probably by with Neptune and that with Mars, like sacrificing or softening the drive or the sort of the horn of the bull that I always think of Mars, is like the fixed star Elnath in Taurus, like the horn of the bull, like that needs to drive through the wall. And Neptune being like, hey, you know what? Why don't we just like go get some tea and like, just expand, think about a different way of approaching this. Because I think one of the things with Mars and Saturn here too, and the square, the sun, is that it can really feel like in fixed signs, like they're just jamming up against each other and neither one's willing to budge. Saturn has provided the wall and Mars is just, trying to trudge through the wall. So I love that. I think for sure we're going to start getting a preview of what's coming up at the end of September and October when Uranus and Saturn come back for their final matchup at 18 of Aquarius and Taurus.
Yeah.
Which I'll be really excited to see what that is, because and I'm really excited for Saturn to move into Pisces.
Yeah. That's going to be, it'll be great to have Saturn out of its own signs and just to feel almost just to feel what Saturn is like when it's not just on steroids, as it has been for a while now. But I think also of, the Mars Sun dynamic, or the Sun Saturn dynamic, as another critical moment for I talk about this all the time, but solar figures, fathers, the karma around fathers, leaders, men, or anyone that holds that kind of like executive function, or they're a CEO, an executive, a leader of some kind. You could see authority and challenges to authority within ourselves, around us, as a real theme. And that fits with the Iranian nature of the beginning of the month too. So, well, moving on, I feel like this next transit on the same day is also promising. On the same day that, the Sun and Saturn are opposing just after the full moon, Mars is hitting a trine to Pluto, both in Earth signs. to me, given that, Mars has gone through a square to Saturn, Mars has conjoined Uranus earlier in the month. I don't know if we hit on the Mars square to Saturn or not, but it's kind of been mixed into everything we've said, that there's this kind of tension between Uranus and Saturn throughout the month anyway. But Mars hitting the trine to Pluto again, this part of the month is interesting because pretty close after that, you're going to also see a Venus trine to Jupiter, which we'll get to in just a second, but it feels harmonious. So there's this big jam, as there was at the beginning of the month with Mars Uranus, and then right afterward you have a few things that make it feel like the clouds part a little bit, or that there's Mars Pluto trines are very effective in terms of getting things done, moving through obstacles, facing challenges but moving through them effectively, removing obstacles, gaining support from people, or finding resources to help you accomplish something. So I really like that energy hanging around right as Sun and Saturn are separating. It's almost like, there's going to be these tense spots, but then right afterward, the resources and the smoothness are there in the sky as well.
And that you can really, there's a lot of, I don't know if I'd say ease is the right word between a Mars Pluto trine, but there's a sense of like whatever gets stirred up with that big mix around the full moon, whatever might feel, especially with Saturn in the mix, that it feels like it's just being kind of like held, or that you can't. There's that Mars Pluto. You couldn't ask for a better aspect to sort of be like, okay, well, we can go through this, even if it's difficult. We can move through it. Pluto, I find Pluto brings immense resources. You get the whole resource of the underworld at your disposal, and I think that is the trines are always really interesting because they can move through really intense stuff.
Yeah. And then we have Venus coming into a trine with Jupiter on August 18th, just a few days later. Venus Jupiter trines are also here's the benefics. They're always trying to lend support, resources, good fortune, harmony, things that are enjoyable, things that are supportive. And the two of them coming together in fire signs that are all about action. You get a Mars ruled sign, Jupiter in a Mars ruled sign. It feels to me again like, there's something about this that is action oriented and supportive. And that coming in around some of the logjam of the full moon time and the sun opposite Saturn just generally gives me the feeling like there's it's so cliche, but it's like the obstacle. What is the phrase? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
That feels like this month. It's Uranian month. Mars is we're about to talk about Mars moving into Gemini, which is a very good transit for problem solving. So I feel like this is a transit where there's the one thing to be watching out for would be almost like the some kind of super demonstrative theatrical display of ego, like, oh, I'm so buff, I'm just going to go to Target in a loincloth or something, like Venus, not me. Venus trine Jupiter can give that almost like false sense of how great you are. So maybe there's a little bit of the bravado of Venus Jupiter in a fire sign, but I think also from time to time exaggeration is necessary. There's something about always walking the middle path in itself becomes extreme, and sometimes you just need to put the peacock tail up and strut your stuff. And that's I think that's Venus Jupiter is very good for that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's funny. Used to just the peacock feathers. I was thinking of, there could be the bravado or display of ego, but also like big displays of love, like that. I kept thinking of that movie, I can't remember, from the 80s, where the guy shows up in the yard with the boombox over his head.
Say Anything. Yeah.
Yeah, like that sort of thing, like this impulsive, big, brash, display, in Leo, the Venus and Leo of love or something like that. So it's an interesting sort of, I think it adds actually a little bit of sort of like healthy drama and expansion to the month where it might feel otherwise a little bit like erratic. I love this. Right? But I'm a fire sign too.
Yeah. I like that one too. I think it's going to be really effective. Well, here to me is like one of the most exciting transits of the month, really of the year, which is going to last for a long time. So it's not like this is the day on which something, all of something will happen. Mars is going to enter Gemini on August 20th. Mars will stay in Gemini because it's going to retrograde right around Halloween into January, and then it moves forward again. So it's there from late August to about March. And that's, first of all, a really long period of time. So the first thing we could tell you is look at the whole sign house of Gemini in your birth chart. There's going to be a lot of activity, change, learning, and focus on that area of life. But aside from that, again, I will go back to the fact for me that, Mercury was trining, moving to trine Mars, and is now Mars is now disposed of by a very highly exalted Mercury, who's bright, so getting heavy as an evening star. Feels like implementing something. Mars is naturally inclined to start things. It's doing and starting things on behalf of the mind, speech, communication, technology. I think it's really interesting that major developments in the internet happened the last time Mars, in the 90s, when Mars was retrograde in Gemini. There's often big leaps in technology associated with Mars retrograde periods in Gemini. But, when I look back at Mars in Gemini, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was I started getting involved in reading competitions when I was a little kid. They were called the MS Readathons, and you had to see how much money you could get people to sponsor you to read a certain number of books within a certain number of time, and it all went to supporting research and development of treatment for multiple sclerosis. And so as a kid, that transit coincided with me getting into reading competitions. Isn't that funny?
Wow. I mean, you couldn't get a more perfect signature of that.
Yeah.
You really, yeah. It's like, like of processing information, but competing to process information. It's just like, wow.
Yeah. Like, how many Encyclopedia Brown books can I read as quickly as I can read them? What else? I don't know. Motorcycle Mouse. It was like that. That was about that age.
Nicula was my thing. That was my book. I remember at that time.
But Nicula, I can't remember. Yes, the Vampire Bunny, right?
Vampire Bunny, yeah.
Oh my God, yeah, that's classic. I can't wait till my daughter's old enough for me to read her, or she can read Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. Do you remember that?
No, I don't think
Judy. I think it was Judy Blume. There was also I think Ramona Quimby, How to Eat Fried Worms. Did you ever read that one?
All the Ramona books. I remember reading all the Ramona books.
Yeah. Well, at any rate, Mars is entering Gemini. Do you have anything else you want to add into this one?
No, I think that it was perfect what you said. It's the people I've had in practice with Mars and Gemini tend to be extremely quick and good at sorting information, going through a lot of information and sorting it out very quickly, and sort of like making a decision this way or that way. There's sometimes getting caught between the two, Castor and Pollux, between the twins of Gemini, between should I do this, should I do that? But I think it's going to be really big technological stuff is going to come out.
Yeah. As a Mars in Gemini native, I can also confirm that, for example, my wife, she is pretty good. She's got Mars or Mercury in Aries, which is sort of similar, Mercury in a Mars ruled sign. And I have Mars in a Mercury ruled sign. She will be like, let me look this up. Type, and I'm like, give me that. And then I'm like, it's right here. Just, what's your problem? And she's like, not everyone's on speed like you. God, like, I'm like, and part of the reason I think that people are like, geez, you make so much content on YouTube. People always tell me that. And I'm like, to me, it's pretty speedy. Like I'm able to do it, I think, fairly effectively. I attribute that to be like Mars and Gemini. That energy, regardless, I'm to talk myself up here. Mars in Gemini can also talk too much. So I'll just shut up and we'll go on to Mercury opposite Neptune. August. This is interesting. Here, just as Mars enters Mercury's sign and says, all right, let's do it. Let's do the most intelligent thing ever. Mercury's like, let's go. Let's take some LSD. What do you
like the Colin series on Netflix, which is a Change Your Mind about psychedelics? He does this whole thing on like different types of psychedelics and the research around it. And that's exactly what I was thinking of for this transit. It's I think I actually like Neptune in the sense for Mercury in Virgo, because Mercury is now getting to the tail end of Virgo, and you can get so into the weeds with Virgo and the analyzation. Neptune's a little bit more like, hey man, you know what? It's all going to be good. Like there's a little bit quality to it. I think that it can feel like what was at first very clear at the beginning of Mercury's ingress starts to become a little bit muddier, or it's harder to think through it, or I always feel Neptune's transits almost like sometimes clarity gets like sucked out of you. It's just like, I can't even really process thought very well. But I think with Mercury so well dignified, it actually might soften up some of the impeccableness that Virgo often needs to feel, and let there feel like a sense of like, one thing I think I wrote this down was like, Mercury in Virgo, I think sometimes needs to learn how to have faith in some area of life, like have faith that things will work out. Like you can only work into something as much as you can with your rational mind, and then eventually you have to give it over to the bigger mind. You have to give it over to something bigger. And I think that Neptune really helps in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I'm glad. I was just reflecting on the fact that I'm giving a couple of talks at ESAR, this astrology conference that's taking place in Colorado. And I'm glad it's the following weekend, because I think it would be tough to give like clear, like my tendency to go off into some, stream of consciousness thoughts about my subject would probably take over if Venus was opposite, or if Mercury was opposite Neptune that weekend. So that's good. I was just looking at looking at my calendar. I was like, wait a second. Is that the weekend? Okay, good. It's next weekend. Yeah, I think the other thing that's interesting here is that Mercury can think it knows what's best. And Mars entering Gemini is like, oh, we've had this plan. We're ready to go, right? And all of a sudden Mercury hits Neptune, and it's like, yeah, but did you consider this other perspective that is a little bit alien to the way that Mercury thinks or processes? Not to say that Mercury is just the analytical mind. Mercury Hermes was associated with philosophy and logos, and the whole study of astrology was really considered a hermetic science. So I don't think that Mercury is like anti-mysticism or something. But I would say that Mercury in Virgo in an earth sign tends to be, like you said, sort of impeccable and diligent and a little bit more earthy and practical. And I think that at the very least, Neptune is going to be more impressionistic or imaginative in asking Mercury to incorporate some of that, which, I mean, let's face it, there is, the logos isn't, as like a way of thinking, isn't always good at incorporating that. For example, many people criticize traditional astrologers for not incorporating enough of the archetypal, mythic, poetic dimension of astrology in the way that they teach astrology. So I think that Hermes Mercury can be like the most brilliant sort of Pythagorean philosopher that sees the interlocking, the symmetry of the whole system of astrology, for example. But Neptune is like, yeah, but can you sing beautifully? It's more sensual. It's Venus's exaltation in Pisces,
Yeah, can you walk outside and look up at the sky and not have to put angles between all the planets and just appreciate it as a whole? That would be
That's
Neptune.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting that right after this happens, Mercury will ingress into Libra, Venus's sign, almost as though there's some prompting of Mercury to start thinking in a way that is Venusian. And then, of course, going into September, Mercury is going to turn retrograde in Libra. So, that's interesting to consider, that there's this kind of transition point. Mercury will move back into a trine with Mars, going into September. It's going to be retrograde in Libra. And in a sense, that it's like there is some kind of Venusian consideration that Mercury is going to be implementing with Mars. So that's something to, I guess, pay attention to. Let's go to August 27th, one of my personal favorite aspects, because it's one that I'm living through right now. here we go. Here's August 27th when Venus in Leo it's just passed on the clock at this moment, but Venus in Leo will be moving through the square to Uranus and Taurus by August 27th. It's fun that 19-degree mark happens to be my natal degree. So I'm literally, this is like a doubling up of, it's like a Venus return for me at the same time. It's really interesting. And that will be the weekend at ESAR. So I'm hoping that bodes well and that I'm not too rebellious in the way I deliver whatever talk I have, that I don't get in too much trouble with whatever comes out of my mouth. But
Good flash you can get from that.
Yeah. What do you think of Venus square Uranus?
I love Venus square Uranus, honestly. I think it's one of those. I think that there's a lot of inventiveness and I mean, the square. All right, let me temper this by saying it's a square. So you have to be mindful again of that sort of like revolutionary impulse, just for the sake of revolution. But I think it's one of those aspects that helps you see through the Venus topics of beauty and adornment and relationships and sensuality and eroticism in a different way, a way you may not have considered, that liberates you in some way, that liberates those aspects of your life. Uranus in its best sense to me is when it really does break you free of some sort of shackle you didn't even know was there, or some habit you didn't know was there. With the square, I think you just have to be mindful of taking Mars-like action. So quick, willful, rebellious action, to just for the sake of doing it or to prove a point in that way.
Yeah, I like Venus Uranus. To me, I've always compared to the first time that I watched the Rocky Horror Picture Show with a group of people who all knew the rituals around it when I was in graduate school, and I was like embarrassed and scared. And then I was like enjoying it. And then I was overcome by the reverie. It was like very Dionysian. It was like getting, just being taken out and forced to go into an experience that was sort of irreverent and provocative, but ultimately fun.
Yeah.
And Venus Uranus can also be, sometimes you'll see people like new technology in the beauty industry, or the sudden need for freedom in a relationship that leads to a breakup. It could be so many different things.
It's a really interesting aspect, and especially now that all these planets are kind of going through Uranus, Saturn, Uranus, Saturn, Uranus, Saturn, that sort of thing. That's really interesting too.
What do we think about the fact that we've got a new moon coming through at the same time? There it is again. There it is. Let's just do it. Just do it.
Don't try to dim your light.
I know. Let's just let the big arrow speak. It wants to speak. You can be heard. Venus Uranus, as we're saying, Venus Uranus. Well, here's a new moon in Virgo square to Mars in Gemini. So you've got two Mercury ruled signs. They're square to one another, tends to be more harmonious because they have like a lichen girding with the cooperative rulership of Mercury. Mercury is in a Venus ruled sign. I think that bodes well for this square. It's interesting though that this is happening at the same time that Venus is squaring Uranus. What do you make of the concurrent new moon square Mars?
The new moon square, I think it's a really good beginning to this. I like the beginning of this cycle, and I think that if I had to put Virgo and Gemini together just as archetypes, I would think of the ability to organize or pare down or sort of sort out information, and sort of Gemini can sometimes, I always think of like Gemini as like light quanta that are just kind of floating all over. There's a lot of light in Gemini that can feel like a lot of information, but Virgo takes it and says, yes, well, we're going to have this filing cabinet and put A here and B here and C here. So I actually think it not only is a new moon that helps sort of initiate action and get things done, but it helps you sort of categorize a vast amount of information.
Yeah.
I would see that. Yeah.
This is another little example of a bit of a log jam, because on the 28th, this is the final transit of the month, Venus will oppose Saturn, and you can see that forming in the sky at the same time. Here is Venus in Leo opposing Saturn. So we'll just move it forward about a day. I think it's interesting because here you've got a new moon with a square to Mars. Venus has gone through the square to Uranus, but now it's hitting the roadblock of Saturn. This is exactly what we saw at the full moon in August. It's like a repeat of that, but now with Venusian things.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me. That the need to the flair and personality of Venus and Leo, so demonstrative, theatrical, more self-centered, and I don't necessarily mean that in an egotistical way, but the need to display one's selfhood vividly, beautifully, and probably verbally or mentally with the new moon square Mars and Gemini. And then there's getting this check from Saturn, who either doesn't like it or is trying to tone it down if it's become too egotistical. And that seems to be like it's a reiteration of the Saturn Uranus square that's starting to grow in intensity coming into the fall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Saturn, and one of the best qualities of Saturn is in Buddhism what we call healthy doubt, which is just healthy skepticism, where, you know, Venus is coming off of this, you know, the square to Uranus and the trine to Jupiter, and is in Leo, and now you've got the sun, so Venus is host in Virgo, a little bit more toned down of a sign. You have Saturn coming in, just being like, let's just double check that.
Yeah.
Let's just double check all of that thing you feel hopped up about. Maybe great, but let's just double check it. You know, on the other side of that, you might feel like something runs into a wall, or you might feel like, I think particularly with the Leo Aquarius axis, there can often be questions of like you said, like self-focus versus what is best for all, the ideal for humanity, the ideal for the community, the ideal for where, you know, what is around me. And that might be something that comes up with this too, is Saturn. So, you know, retrograde, but still empowered in its own sign.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a revisiting of old hurts potentially, or old inhibitions. I could feel Venus and Leo is like, I'm going to express myself, but oh, wait, I've always been scared to do so. Or I'm overcoming some form of inhibition, or, you know, something that's a little too self-centered in a negative way is getting some kind of healthy check. Well, these are our transits for the month of August. I think we did a pretty good job. Is there anything else you want to end with overall that you feel is worth saying about August?
You know, no, it just begins on the rocket ship, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true, man. I mean, it's such an, oh wow, it's so powerful. And I'm like, it's in my first house. So I've been as a Taurus rising, I've been like, it's the weirdest thing whenever Mars goes through Taurus in my first house. I feel like a bull in a china shop. I feel like last night I was teaching my daughter to play chess, and I found myself starting to get irate over the fact that she kept wanting to move a pawn in the incorrect way. I was like, no, that's not the way we do it. We go like this. And she's like, well, what if I just want to move it 6 spaces? And I was like, you know, and instead of me just being like, yeah, because you're a kid and who cares, you know, like, instead I was like, that's not the way the chess is played. And I started, and I was like, my acyuta, you're starting to stress out about a stupid thing. But it was like the bull in me was like, it doesn't matter. It's just like, oh my God. So I feel like the Mars Uranus thing, I'm just buckling in. I'm like, God, I'm just hoping that I'm like, look at my sunburnt face. Like I'm just hoping that I don't have like steam coming out of my ears when that thing happens.
Me too. I've been saying in my meditations in the morning, I'm like, guide my thinking, because it's getting crazy real fast. Like,
yeah,
because it feels like it's like you've gone from 0 to 60 and you don't even know how it happened. And just like that, I've had similar things, but it's in my 10th house. So I've been thinking of like, I need to move to Alaska and like start weaving or whatever. You know? You're all together, you know, like, and I'm like, okay, whoa, turn it down.
That's so funny. Yeah, I mean, this is a great time to remind people that if you have stories that come up for you, we would love to hear them. So share them by using the hashtag grabbed, or grabbed at nightlightastrology.com. The ancient name for the planets the Indian astrologers gave them was grahas, which means grabber. It also means to grasp and to understand. And so we share our stories about the way in which the planets show up and sees us, so that we can understand and grow and learn and laugh. So thank you, Alex, for being here. Don't forget, if you want to follow Alex, get a reading from him, the best way to do so would be Instagram at Alex Amorosi Healing. And if you want to check out his website, he's got yoga classes that he teaches and stuff like that. But for the astrology content, Instagram is better, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's easier
Okay.
to contact. Right now, it's easier to contact me there too. Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, thank you everybody so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, share your comments in the comments section, click the notification bell for updates. You can always find transcripts of the talks on the website. Any questions as you're checking out the website, email us info@nightlightastrology.com. Alex, thank you so much for being here, and we will see you guys. Yeah, have a great month of August, everyone.